Before this video starts, I'd just like to make an announcement. I have the Liberal Tears mug for $14.99 on my website. It is the first link in the description if you want to go pick one up. Don't worry if it breaks when it comes to your house. I'll send you another one for free out of my pocket. I don't care. I want you to get your Liberal Tear mug. It comes in Liberal Tears white with the face, black with the face, white without the face, and black without the face. So pick whichever one you want, and it'll come to your door in about 3 to 5 days. So that should be epic. First link in the description. Thank you. Let's go on with the video.
Now, since the Trump election, there is an effort. There's been a kind of a shift of paradigms, a shift of what I'm going to call meta stories. Now, when we think of the media, we think the media writes stories, and we're often trying to catch somebody out in a lie. You know, Hillary lied about Benghazi. Obama lied about this, about you can keep your doctor if you want to. But these are mini lies. You can call them retail lies. A wholesale lie, or what I call a meta lie, is the big lie behind the small lies. And meta lies are very hard to detect because they're so big. They encompass a lot. And I actually want to talk about two meta lies that are made specifically about Trump, but more broadly about the Republican Party. And they pertain a lot to what goes on in higher education, because they're right in the vocabulary of higher education. And specifically the two meta stories, the two meta lies, are that Trump is a fascist and that Trump is a racist. And I want to say a little word about both these things. First of all, the idea that Trump is a fascist is now the dominant narrative in describing this president. Trump is a fascist. It's almost taken for granted that a point has been proven. Robert Paxton, one of the leading scholars of fascism, was interviewed recently in Slate magazine, and he makes the point, he says, when Trump crosses his arms and looks to the left, he goes, he bears a resemblance to Mussolini. I guess he failed to mention that Trump is also an aficionado of Italian food. But this notion that Trump is a fascist is actually very important to the left right now, because it licenses this orgy of delegitimation, hatred, and even violence that is unleashed against Trump and is justified in the name of fighting fascism. There was a scholar in the 1960s, a kind of guru of the new left. His name was Herbert Marcuse, and his slogan was "No free speech for fascists." No free speech for fascists. And the basic idea was something like this: we, the left, are extremely tolerant. However, we have no obligation to be tolerant of the intolerant. Therefore, we are perfectly justified in unleashing, by any means necessary, by the way, the name of one of the protest groups at Berkeley, blocking as best as we can, repressing even if we have to, free speech. Why? Because how else could you stop Hitler? If Hitler were coming to power in the 30s, wouldn't it be justified to use repression and even violence to shut him down? Look at all the carnage that could have been prevented. So Marcuse's argument was, this was in a famous essay he wrote called Repressive Tolerance, that tolerant people have got to learn to be intolerant. And I guess this was sort of the motive of some of the guys who defaced my posters. No free speech for fascists. Now, leave aside the irony, which you could see, by the way, if you saw those protests at Berkeley, of stormtrooper-like leftists dressed in all black, head to toe with masks. carrying weapons. So leave aside the irony of using fascist tactics to fight fascism. I actually want to raise the prior question, which is it really the case that Trump is a fascist? Is the GOP a fascist party? First of all, it's important to note that this whole business of Trump and the GOP being fascist relies upon an assumption that is never questioned, that fascism is something that is right-wing. Fascism is a right-wing phenomenon. And if you think about it, most of us haven't thought about why fascism is right-wing. What does it even mean to be right-wing, and what is it about fascism that makes it right-wing? Well, the fascists were really ultra-nationalists. First of all, being ultra-nationalist hardly makes you right-wing. Che Guevara was an ultra-nationalist. Stalin was an ultra-nationalist. In fact, he talked about motherland Russia and what he called socialism in one country. Gandhi was a nationalist. FDR was a nationalist. Hugo Chavez in Venezuela is a nationalist. So clearly it can't be that nationalism alone, a fierce attachment to one's own country, automatically makes you a fascist. Well, Trump is against immigrants. I'm an immigrant. My wife here, Debbie, is an immigrant from Venezuela. You might think that we've been living in fear since Trump's election. When you open the New York Times every day, I see headlines like, Trump getting ready to deport millions of immigrants. Millions of immigrants. Not illegal aliens, but immigrants. Notice that somehow suddenly illegal aliens are conflated with immigrants. I don't even mean illegal immigrants. If you're illegal, you're not an immigrant. People say, well, Trump is getting ready. Trump is getting ready to deny the illegals their constitutional rights. Yes, this is actually the implication of the argument. Now, it is not an argument from fascism. It is an argument right out of Locke and John Stuart Mill and the most liberal of liberal traditions to believe that American society is a social compact. It's a bargain or a deal among a group of people who come together, form a government, agree to relinquish the exercise of certain of their basic rights in exchange for certain forms of protection. This social compact is between and among citizens in the same way that the rules of a club apply to its members. If someone is outside the social compact, they do not have any constitutional rights. None. None. Now, I'm not suggesting that they don't have natural rights, nor am I suggesting that they don't have human rights, but constitute bargain among citizens. And like I say, this is the core of the meaning of liberalism. Well, yeah, but it's vaguely reminiscent of all the stuff that Hitler used to do. Now, first of all, we live in a society where the term Hitler has taken on a certain kind of bizarre significance. The philosopher Leo Strauss used to talk about what he called reductio ad Hitlerum. Basically, if Hitler was for it, that makes it bad. But the point I want to make, in California, for example, this whole notion of Hitler, the Nazis, is preposterously used to refer to things that have nothing to do with Nazism. You literally have people with great excitement say, I'm a food Nazi. I'm a surf Nazi. I'm a health Nazi. For them, Nazism basically denotes commitment. Being really dedicated to something makes you a Nazi. Now, here's what I want to say. Hitler was not anti-immigrant. The Jews in Germany were citizens. They weren't immigrants. They were citizens of Germany. So clearly Hitler's distinction was not between the immigrant and the native. Hitler's distinction was within Germany. It was a kind of ethnic or racial distinction in which some citizens belonged, the Nordics, the Germanics, and other citizens were excluded. Hitler preferred Austrian Germans over German Jews. So right away, that this whole immigrant thing has nothing to do with Hitler. He was operating on a totally different compass. Now, I'm writing about this, and I'm going to be having a lot more to say about it. I'll make one more brief observation about fascism, and then I want to move to racism, which is going to be a little bit more my focus. Fascism, by the way, is not the same as Nazism. Hitler very rarely used the term fascist. Read Mein Kampf. You'll hardly find that term ever used. Mussolini, who was the prototypical fascist, never called himself a National Socialist. And so fascism and National Socialism are somewhat different. They're related. Essentially, the main difference is that National Socialism was at its core racist. National Socialism was anti-Semitic. National Socialism drew a racial line that fascism never drew. For example, the Italian fascists were a lot less racist than, for example, the American Democratic Party. Much less. I don't deny Mussolini did become anti-Semitic toward the end, but it was mainly because he felt he had to maintain the alliance with Hitler. There was no inherent anti-Semitism in fascism. In fact, a number of the early fascists were Jews. Now, when you look at the origin of fascism, a subject that is now shrouded in mist, you come to a remarkable finding, and that is that all the founders of original fascism were leftists. All of them were either Marxists or socialists or radicals associated in Britain with the Labour Party, in France with the Socialist Party, in Germany and Italy with either the Marxists or the Communists. In other words, fascism was, start to finish, a left-wing phenomenon that emerged out of a debate about the failed prophecies of Marx. Essentially, Marx predicted the revolution of the proletariat. It never happened. And so there was something called the crisis of Marxism in the early part of the 20th century. And out of that crisis of Marxism came two new variations of Marxism, very different from anything Marx would have predicted. The first was Leninist Bolshevism, and the other was Italian fascism. This is the undisputed truth of history, but if you're a little puzzled about it, I don't really blame you. Why? Because after World War II, there was a very important progressive cover-up project that went on in America. And the basic idea was to camouflage the close associations of the political left with fascism and Nazism, and to move fascism and Nazism from the left, where they were always understood to be, into the right-wing column. This was actually one of the most cunning sleights of hand ever performed in American history. Now, how do you pull something like this off? How do you fool most of the people most of the time? You can only do it if your group, the left, is sufficiently dominant in academia, in media, and in Hollywood. If you have that, you have the three biggest megaphones of our culture. And so you can broadcast all kinds of whoppers and lies, all kinds of fake news and fake history. And even if some guy in the audience knows differently, you know differently, but you don't have a big enough megaphone to contradict this orthodoxy. And this is kind of why there is a mentality on the left that tries to keep people like me from speaking on campus. Not because not because I'm coming here to blast out racial epithets. You know, I don't need the pompous, I'll defend his to the death his right to speak. It's not about that. It is that ultimately the ideas that I put forward can't be refuted by these people. They don't know enough. And so they become very bitter and frightened, inwardly frightened, because I'll say things, I'll present facts, and they're facts of a scientific nature, by which I mean simply that they are open to refutation. Open to refutation.
Hello everyone! Hey, I'm just stopping by to remind you that liberals are insane! Social justice warriors are becoming more violent and triggered than ever before. Anyways, be sure to subscribe to KGP TV on YouTube and have a blessed day. Yeah, man!